In 1847, on a quiet hill in Wilkes County, Georgia, the Caldwell plantation looked like perfection carved in white wood and cotton fields. Tall columns, a wide porch, 800 acres of land that whispered wealth and respectability. From a distance, it was the kind of place people pointed to and said, "That is how power looks." But power has a way of rotting from the inside. That spring, the Caldwell twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, turned 22. Identical in every detail, even the small birthmark above their right eyebrow, they were admired, envied, and quietly questioned. In a society where girls married young, the twins remained untouched by proposals, untouched by scandal, at least publicly. Behind closed doors, something else was unfolding. Letters written by a longtime housekeeper would later hint at it, whispers of the twins spending time far from the big house, near the slave quarters, where they were never meant to go, where no white woman of their status should even be seen. Most people would have called that impossible, unthinkable. But history doesn't care what society finds acceptable. Because on this plantation, two forbidden bonds were forming, bonds so dangerous they would lead to fire, disappearance, and a lie powerful enough to survive for more than a century. So here's the question that haunted Georgia for generations. What could drive two privileged sisters to risk everything for men the law said weren't even human? To understand what the Caldwell twins were risking, you have to understand the world they lived in. The Caldwell estate was home to nearly 70 enslaved people, men, women, and children whose lives moved according to bells, whips, and written ledgers. They slept in wooden cabins hidden beyond a line of oak trees, far enough from the main house that their suffering wouldn't disturb polite conversation at dinner. Among them were two men listed in plantation records, with almost no detail at all. Samuel, Elijah. Purchased 5 years earlier from a failing South Carolina plantation, they were described as strong, quiet, obedient, words meant to erase identity, to reduce a human life to inventory. But what those records did not mention was that both men could read. It was Catherine who discovered the truth. One evening in late autumn of 1846, she wandered into the stables to escape another suffocating dinner conversation about suitors and dowries. There, by lantern light, she saw Samuel holding a discarded newspaper, his eyes moving calmly across the page. He didn't beg. He didn't panic. He simply looked up and met her gaze. In that moment, something cracked open. Instead of reporting him, Catherine said nothing. No scream, no accusation, just silence. And silence, in that world, was the most dangerous choice of all. Because once a secret like that exists, it doesn't stay small. It grows. And soon, Catherine was no longer the only twin carrying one. So here's the question. When one forbidden secret is discovered, how long before it pulls others into its orbit? After that night in the stables, Catherine could not return to being who she was before. She found excuses to walk the grounds at dusk, to linger near the barns, to ask harmless questions that weren't harmless at all. And Samuel, careful and measured, began answering them, not as property, but as a man who understood the danger of every word. They spoke quietly, briefly, always with distance. At first, then the conversations changed. Books, ideas, the world beyond Georgia. Samuel spoke of things Catherine had never heard discussed in her father's house, freedom as a moral truth, not a political inconvenience, faith without obedience, knowledge as a form of escape. For Catherine, raised to believe herself superior by birth alone, it was disorienting. For the first time, someone saw her not as a prize to be married off, but as a mind worth engaging. And she fell. Not suddenly, not recklessly, but slowly and completely. What Catherine did not know, what made the situation far more dangerous, was that her sister Elizabeth was walking a similar path. While Catherine met Samuel near the stables, Elizabeth spent long afternoons in the gardens. There, Elijah worked among the hedges and flowering trees, quiet and observant. Over time, glances became conversations. Conversations became understanding. Two sisters. Two enslaved men. Two secrets moving in perfect symmetry. Winter closed in on the plantation, colder than usual. Roads froze. Visitors stopped coming. The world shrank. And inside that isolation, something irreversible formed. Because this was no longer curiosity. It was attachment. And attachment, in 1847 Georgia, was a death sentence. So ask yourself this. If love is forbidden by law, does that make it impossible or just more dangerous? Winter in 1847 pressed hard against the Caldwell plantation. Frost cracked the windows at dawn. Cotton stores froze, threatening the family's wealth. The isolation weighed heavily on the twins, but it also gave their relationships room to breathe, hidden, yet growing stronger with every stolen conversation. Catherine's diary, discovered over a century later, described these nights. The crackle of fire in the hearth, the soft murmur of Samuel's voice, the way he explained the stars, the winds, the lives beyond Georgia, things Catherine had only ever read about in books. Elizabeth, meanwhile, walked through the garden under the dim moonlight, meeting Elijah by the rose hedges. Their hands never touched in public, but in those secret moments, every glance carried a weight that no words could fully capture. The twins began to coordinate without anyone noticing. Messages slipped between pages of poetry, notes folded into books, plans whispered in the quiet hours of the night. Every meeting, every word, carried the risk of ruin. The overseer, James Whittaker, began noticing small, unusual incidents, misplaced tools, lanterns left burning, quiet sounds in the distance. Yet he could not piece together the truth. One March evening, Thomas Caldwell announced an impending marriage for both twins to men of prominent families, chosen without their consent. Elizabeth and Catherine smiled politely. Outwardly, nothing betrayed their shock, but behind closed doors, a plan had already begun. A plan that would challenge everything their father thought he controlled. So here's the question hanging in the air. When society forces obedience, what lengths will someone go to claim their freedom and love on their own terms? 3 days after Thomas Caldwell announced the arranged marriages, the tension at the plantation reached a breaking point. It was the early hours of March 18th when the overseer, James Whittaker, was awakened by a loud commotion near the slave quarters. Something heavy had struck a storage building. Smoke curled into the pre-dawn sky, a fire small but deliberate. Whittaker rushed to contain it, but by the time the flames were under control, the twins and the two men, Samuel and Elijah, were gone. Panic spread quickly. Search parties scoured every road, every trail, and even neighboring plantations. A reward was offered for their capture. Everyone assumed the enslaved men had escaped and somehow taken the daughters with them. But the truth was far more calculated. Elizabeth had set the fire herself, not to harm anyone, but to create a distraction. It was a diversion, a carefully planned opening for their escape. Every moment had been timed with precision, the quiet shuffle of feet, the soft clink of lanterns, the route along the hidden paths through the woods. Thomas Caldwell, unaware of the scheme, fell into despair. Days without sleep, obsessive questioning, and mounting fear consumed him. He believed the worst had happened, his daughters abducted, his authority shattered. Meanwhile, Catherine and Elizabeth moved through the shadows, hearts pounding, minds focused, knowing that any misstep could cost them everything. And in that silent flight, they were no longer just daughters of privilege. They were rebels, lovers, and architects of their own fate. So now I ask you, when love and freedom collide with the rules of a cruel society, how far would you go to rewrite your destiny? The search for the Caldwell twins and the two men dragged on for weeks. Neighbors, deputies, and even bounty hunters combed the surrounding counties, following every trail, questioning anyone who might have seen something. But the quartet had vanished into the wilderness with careful planning and courage few could imagine. Back at the plantation, Thomas Caldwell's health deteriorated. His nights were sleepless, haunted by thoughts of betrayal, scandal, and failure. His servants whispered about the unnatural silence in the halls, the absence of the twins' laughter, and the eerie calm of the main house. In secret, Catherine and Samuel had reached the cover of the dense woods, where Elizabeth and Elijah were already waiting. They shared only brief words, careful not to leave trails, moving silently through streams, low branches, and overgrown paths. It was a journey that demanded every ounce of resolve. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear were constant companions, but each step forward brought them closer to freedom, closer to a life they could choose for themselves, away from the tyranny of wealth, power, and oppression. And yet, even in those moments, their thoughts lingered on what they were leaving behind. Family, status, comfort, but more than that, the life everyone expected them to live. They were abandoning safety for the unknown. The question now is, would you risk everything you know for the promise of true freedom and love? By late March 1847, the Caldwell twins and their companions had crossed several county lines. Each night, they hid in abandoned cabins, barns, and dense forest thickets. Their only map was trust in each other and whispered directions from sympathetic travelers who knew the roads less patrolled. Catherine and Samuel moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could lead to capture or worse. Every creaking branch, every distant bark of a hound, was a reminder that freedom was fragile. Elizabeth and Elijah mirrored their actions, the four of them synchronized in a silent rhythm born of necessity. During brief moments of rest, the twins reflected on their lives in luxury and confinement. They remembered the harsh lessons of their father's authority, the quiet suffering of the enslaved men around them, and the hidden injustices they had witnessed since childhood. It wasn't just about escaping arranged marriages, it was about rejecting a world built on cruelty and privilege. By March 20th, their route brought them to the outskirts of a small town where rumors of free black communities provided a glimmer of hope. Here, they would find guidance, resources, and the first taste of autonomy that had been denied them all their lives. But as they neared safety, a chilling thought lingered in their minds. What if freedom comes at a cost far greater than they imagined? Here's the question for you. How far would you go when every step toward freedom could mean life or death? By the third week of March, the group had reached the edge of a small settlement rumored to shelter free black families and abolitionists sympathetic to escaped slaves. Every shadow, every passerby was a potential threat. They moved cautiously, slipping through back alleys, avoiding main streets, and keeping to the dim light of dawn and dusk. It was in this precarious safety that the twins began to realize the weight of their choices. They were no longer sheltered daughters, they were fugitives, reliant on the skills, courage, and wits of their enslaved partners. Samuel and Elijah, once seen as property, now became protectors, guides, and allies in ways Thomas Caldwell could never have imagined. Their nights were restless. Every whisper, every creaking floorboard reminded them of the life they had left behind and the consequences that awaited if they were discovered. Yet amid the fear, there was exhilaration. Freedom tasted both bitter and sweet. In one hidden attic, Elizabeth whispered to Catherine, "Do you think anyone will ever understand why we did this?" Catherine, gazing out a small window at the moonlit streets, replied, "Maybe not, but we'll understand, and that's enough for now." And as they took their first real steps toward autonomy, one question loomed. When the world condemns your choices, is the pursuit of freedom worth every risk? By late March, Catherine, Elizabeth, Samuel, and Elijah had found refuge with a small community of free black families and abolitionists living quietly on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Here, the air smelled of hope, freedom, and cautious optimism, yet danger still lingered in every corner. The twins learned quickly how different life could be outside the confines of a plantation. Samuel taught Catherine to navigate the bustling streets, barter for necessities, and blend into the crowd. Elijah guided Elizabeth in carpentry and small trade work, skills he had secretly mastered while on the plantation. But freedom wasn't simple. Every day brought new challenges: finding food, earning money, and staying hidden from bounty hunters still scouring the South for escaped slaves. The twins discovered resilience they never knew they possessed, and the men revealed a quiet strength born of years of oppression. Late one evening, by a flickering candle, Catherine wrote in a hidden journal, "We have escaped the chains of our father, but the chains of fear are still with us. Yet, with Samuel and Elijah, I feel the first glimmers of what life should be." And as the candle flickered, the question lingered. Can love truly thrive when every step forward is shadowed by danger? By April 1847, the four had begun to establish routines in their hidden community. Samuel and Elijah worked during the day, earning small wages and gathering supplies, while Catherine and Elizabeth managed their new home and practiced the skills they had never been allowed to learn. Every task, no matter how simple, felt like a triumph over the life they had left behind. Yet the shadow of the Caldwell estate still loomed. Rumors of their escape had spread through Wilkes County, and bounty hunters and informants prowled the southern roads. Each knock at the door, each stranger in town, sparked fear. They knew the price of capture could be death or forced return to their old lives. One quiet night, Catherine whispered to Elizabeth, "Do you think Father will ever stop searching for us?" Elizabeth shook her head slowly. "He may never forgive, but he cannot reach us here, not if we are careful. We have chosen our own destiny." In the candlelight, they realized something profound. Freedom was not simply running away. It was building a life from the ruins of fear, secrecy, and oppression. And as the moon rose high, a question remained. Can courage and love together withstand the weight of a world determined to punish those who defy it? By mid-April, Catherine and Elizabeth had begun to connect with other free black families in Philadelphia, learning about abolitionist networks and the underground efforts to help those still enslaved. Samuel and Elijah were cautious but determined, teaching the twins how to read letters for hidden messages and recognize safe houses along the way. The twins discovered the power of knowledge and community. What had once been forbidden, education, independent thought, and even simple conversation, became tools for survival. They realized that their escape was not just physical but intellectual. Freedom of mind was as vital as freedom of movement. One evening, while studying a map with Samuel, Catherine remarked softly, "We've gone farther than I ever imagined, but do you think we're truly free?" Samuel looked up, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Freedom isn't a place, it's the courage to make choices even when the world is against you." As they prepared for the next steps of their new lives, one question lingered in their hearts. When every choice carries risk, how far will you go to claim your freedom? By late April, Catherine, Elizabeth, Samuel, and Elijah had begun to feel a fragile sense of normalcy. They established a modest home in a safe neighborhood, blending into the rhythms of Philadelphia while quietly building their new lives. Yet, the weight of their past lingered, memories of the Caldwell estate, the cotton fields, and the dangers they had fled haunted them in quiet moments. Catherine spent hours writing in her hidden journal, documenting every step of their escape and the lessons she had learned. Elizabeth practiced sewing and homemaking skills she had never truly been allowed to master, while Samuel and Elijah taught the twins practical trades that would sustain them. Despite their progress, fear remained a constant companion. Each letter from abolitionist contacts, every report of bounty hunters in nearby towns reminded them that their safety was temporary and their past could catch up at any moment. One evening, as the group gathered around a small fire, Elizabeth whispered, "Do you ever wonder if we made the right choice, if running away was worth leaving everything behind?" Catherine's gaze was firm and steady. "We chose life, we chose love, that is worth everything." And as the flames flickered, one question stayed in the air. When you defy an entire world to follow your heart, can anything ever truly hold you back? By May, the twins and their companions had begun to find purpose beyond mere survival. Catherine taught children in the neighborhood to read, while Elizabeth assisted in local businesses, quietly earning respect for her skill and diligence. Samuel and Elijah continued their trades, but also became mentors to other freed or escaped individuals, sharing lessons learned from years of oppression. Yet every triumph came with the reminder of the past. News from the South occasionally reached them, rumors of bounty hunters, of the Caldwell estate's lingering inquiries, and whispers of other families who had been punished for aiding escaped slaves. The shadows of their old lives never fully disappeared. One afternoon, while walking through the bustling streets of Philadelphia, Samuel turned to Catherine. "Do you ever think about father, about the life we left behind?" Catherine shook her head, her expression resolute. "I think about him, yes, but only to remind myself why we chose this path. I will not return to fear, nor let it define me again." As they faced the challenges of freedom and the responsibilities it brought, one question loomed large. Can the bonds of love and trust survive when the past threatens to catch up at any moment? By summer 1847, Catherine, Elizabeth, Samuel, and Elijah had become part of a tight-knit community of freed black families and abolitionist allies. They discovered that freedom was not simply escaping the plantation. It was learning how to live, build, and protect themselves in a world that often remained hostile. Catherine's journal had grown thick with reflections, sketches, and plans. Elizabeth had begun teaching other women domestic skills while quietly mentoring them in reading and writing. Samuel and Elijah taught trades, shared knowledge of survival, and helped neighbors navigate the constant threat of bounty hunters. Despite their achievements, the twins knew the Caldwell name and its influence could follow them at any moment. They moved cautiously, trusting only those who had proven themselves loyal, and remaining alert to every sound and shadow in the city streets. One evening, as they gathered in their small home, Elijah said softly, "We've built something real here, something no one can take away, but at what cost?" Catherine looked out the window at the fading sunlight, her eyes reflecting both determination and sorrow. "The cost was everything we had to leave behind, but what we gain is life, and that is priceless." And as they settled in for the night, the question remained. When freedom is hard-won, can courage and resilience truly protect what you fought for? By autumn of 1847, the Caldwell twins and their husbands had begun to fully embrace their new lives. They had homes, work, and small but growing families. Yet even in this freedom, the echoes of their past lingered. The fear of discovery never left them, and every stranger on the street reminded them that the world they escaped still existed. Catherine continued her education efforts, teaching children the power of knowledge, while Elizabeth organized local women to share skills and resources, quietly empowering others. Samuel and Elijah's trades prospered, providing stability not only for themselves, but for their community. But the twins never forgot the deliberate deception that allowed them to escape. The lies told about their abduction, the concealment of marriage certificates, and the silent complicity of those who had hidden the truth for decades. One evening, as Catherine and Samuel walked along the river, Samuel asked softly, "Do you ever fear that history will forget us, that the truth will be buried again?" Catherine's eyes met his, unwavering. "History may try, but the truth lives in us, and in the stories we pass on. We survived, and that is proof enough." And as the river's reflection shimmered in the moonlight, the question lingered. When the world rewrites your story, how do you ensure your truth survives? By winter 1847, the twins and their husbands had built a fragile sense of stability. Snow fell lightly over the city streets, and the cold reminded them that life outside the plantation was not without challenges. Resources were limited, and trust had to be earned daily. Catherine reflected on the risks they had taken, the lives left behind, and the irreversible choices that had brought them here. Elizabeth, too, carried the weight of their decisions, balancing newfound independence with the constant awareness of what they had escaped. Samuel and Elijah worked tirelessly, their skills and courage enabling the family to survive, but the scars of the past were never far. Each shadow, each unexpected knock at the door, reminded them that freedom was not guaranteed. One quiet evening, Catherine whispered to Elizabeth, "Do you think Father will ever understand why we left?" Elizabeth shook her head slowly. Understanding is not for him, it is for us, for those we save, those we protect, and for the future we dare to build. And as the winter wind howled outside, the question remained. Can the past ever truly be left behind, or does it always follow those who escape it? Spring of 1848 brought a fragile hope to the twins and their husbands. The streets buzzed with life, children laughed in the sunlight, and the scent of blooming flowers reminded them that even after darkness, renewal was possible. Catherine and Samuel had begun documenting their journey in detail, writing letters to allies and friends who had helped them, hoping one day their story might reach those who could not speak for themselves. Elizabeth and Elijah focused on building a small school for children of freed families, ensuring that knowledge and opportunity reached the next generation. Yet shadows of the past lingered. Word had reached them that distant relatives of the Caldwells were asking questions, and bounty hunters still roamed the South, searching for escaped enslaved people. Every journey outside their homes required caution, every interaction measured. One evening, Elizabeth whispered to Catherine, "Do you think we were brave or foolish?" Catherine looked at her sister, her face resolute. Perhaps both, but courage is never measured by safety. It's measured by the choices we make when everything is at risk. And as the night settled over the city, the question echoed. When survival demands risk, how far would you go to protect those you love? By mid-1848, the twins had fully embraced their new identities as Margaret Johnson and Elizabeth Davis. They had created a life built on love, trust, and shared purpose, yet the weight of secrecy was constant. Every letter from distant allies, every cautious conversation, reminded them that the past could reach out at any moment. Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the fires they had set, the deception they had orchestrated, the risks taken for freedom. Samuel reminded her daily that their survival was not just theirs, but a triumph over an entire system built to oppress them. Elizabeth and Elijah poured their energy into the community, helping those who had escaped slavery find footing, teaching skills that would allow them to thrive, and silently resisting the chains of a society that had once bound them. One evening, Catherine turned to Samuel. "Do you ever wonder if the world will remember what we did?" Samuel's voice was steady. "It may not, but our lives, our children, and those we touch will carry the truth forward. History will remember through them." And in the quiet glow of candlelight, the lingering question remained. When the world tries to erase your existence, how do you ensure your story lives on? By 1849, the twins and their husbands had settled into a rhythm of survival and subtle influence. The once shadowed fear of capture had lessened, but vigilance remained part of daily life. Every stranger at the door, every unexpected carriage on the street, reminded them of the fragile line they walked between freedom and danger. Catherine spent hours with her children, teaching them letters, numbers, and stories of courage, while Samuel shared his knowledge of horses and trades to ensure the family's economic stability. Elizabeth and Elijah continued building their school, spreading knowledge and hope among the newly freed families in the city. Despite the sense of security, the past occasionally resurfaced in dreams and whispered memories, memories of the plantation, of their fathers, control, and of the perilous journey north. Yet each challenge only reinforced their resolve. One quiet night, Elizabeth asked Catherine, "Do you think we could ever forgive the world for what it took from us?" Catherine's eyes hardened with determination. "We don't need to forgive the world. We just need to live, to thrive, and to protect what we've fought for." And as the night settled in, the question lingered. Can true freedom exist if the scars of the past remain, or is it defined by the life you build despite them? By 1850, the Caldwell twins, now Margaret Johnson and Elizabeth Davis, had fully embraced their new lives. They were no longer shadows of the past but women who had reclaimed agency over their own destinies. Their children laughed and played freely, unaware of the danger their parents had once faced. Samuel and Elijah had built thriving trades, respected in their communities, while the twins, work with the school and local families ensured knowledge, courage, and hope would continue to spread. Despite years of fear, the past could no longer control them. They had survived betrayal, secrecy, and relentless danger. They had turned oppression into resilience and love into liberation. Every choice, every risk, had been worth the freedom they now held. On a quiet evening, Catherine reflected aloud to Elizabeth, "We escaped more than chains, we escaped fear, and now our lives, our story, they belong to us." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes filled with pride and relief. "And one day, the world will know that love, courage, and perseverance are stronger than any system built to divide and destroy." The final question hung in the air, leaving the audience reflecting. When faced with impossible odds, would you risk everything for love and freedom, or settle for a life dictated by fear?